Well, my memory of the flood was that we were lucky enough to live next door to the man that used to actually control the old bridge that came on and off the island. So he woke my father up about 2 o'clock in the morning to tell him that there was an exceptionally high tide and that the island was flooding, because obviously he'd been informed. My father then got up and worked at the local holiday camp, Thorney Bay Camp, went down to the camp and got a Land Rover, and being an old ex-army man, of course, knew that if you put the inner tube on the back of the exhaust pipe you could drive through anything, and then obviously made his way back to the house. By that time my brother and I had been up and thought it was great fun walking about in the hallway with sparks coming out the plug holes, much to the disgust of my mother. But then obviously the electric all went off, and then my father took me and my brother off of the island to stay with relatives in Benfleet. So it was when we came back everything looked a bit different. My brother used to come back over and see my father because he was 8 years older than me, but my father stayed here the whole time of the flood and actually drove around the engineer and surveyor Reginald Stevens for the whole period of time. So he didn't come off the island with us, he actually stayed here with him. But when you came back, of course, you know, I was young then, your toys, everything had been destroyed, you know, 3 foot of water lines up the house. Only lived in a council house, of course, and then they had to come and redo all the plastering and things like that and board out the walls. So yeah, it was a bit of a traumatic time, but a fun time as well if you're young and don't really understand what's happening. So they're really sort of my memories of it, but a lot of people lost their lives. Luckily we didn't have water quite that deep in our house. It was only about 3 foot deep. So
I think 80 lives lost
yes.
in Canvey. Like
yeah, it was over
300 UK.
Yeah. Yeah, the problem was that where the lives were lost were actually the other side of the island from where we lived. We lived on the long road. They were lost over in the Newlands area of Canvey, because if people know about Canvey, there used to be an inner wall, and the actual wall broke at the end of Brandenburg and Nevada, the 2 roads, and actually filled up that area. I only know this, I used to work at the council offices when I became old enough, so I actually know where the breaches were in the wall because they used to have a map. But yes, it filled up the Newlands area, and that's where most of the lives were lost because the water was up to their roots before they realised it. And some people went out and got in trees, but they died of hypothermia because it was a cold, horrible night and not very pleasant at all. So.
How long did it take to recover from the event?
I think we were over in the. I think we were over at Benfleet for about 6 weeks. My mother, brother, and I stayed over there, but it took an awful long time after that because all the RAF and everything were here, drying out the houses with huge heaters. And as I say, and then like all the plaster had to be taken off because every house where we lived, the council house, all had a cellar, which didn't help matters very much because the cellar went down underneath the house. So everywhere was full of water for ages. And as I say, actually took a long while for people to sort of come back to Canvey, if you like, because no one wanted to buy a house, did they, that had been, you know, that had been flooded. Didn't apply to us. We lived in a council house, but no one wanted, you know, the builders weren't making any money. No one wanted to come to Canvey after the flood, did they? But saying that, it's we're all right at the moment till it comes over again, I suppose. And but who knows? If you live below sea level and you live on Canvey, it's a chance you take, I'm afraid. So they're sort of my memories of. A fun time if you're only young, but not so funny if you're a mum and dad. And most of the people on the island as well weren't insured against flood. I don't know if people are aware of that. That's why they had the Lord Mayor's Fund, wasn't it? So to try and help people out that had lost everything. So.
In 1953, it was a Saturday evening, and at the time the local residents was going to the War Memorial Hall on Canvey. That was a hall that was in tribute to the soldiers, airmen and the Navy that had passed away during World War II. That social event in that hall was to acclimatise into a serious situation, because when they went to the hall to open it up, they enjoyed themselves in the evening, but on the way home, it actually was January the 31st, was the night that the surge tides came forward, and the tide surges up the English Channel and obviously the North Sea, came down, funneled itself into the River Thames towards London, and unfortunately Canvey seawall breached on the north side of Canvey, which is where Benfleet is, where Benfleet Station and Hadley Castle is, causing the fatalities of 58 people on Canvey. Most of them were adults, but there was young children and school children that perished or died of hypothermia and drowned, and it changed the course of Canvey's history with regards to seawall defence. But other areas suffered a lot of fatalities, and right up towards West Ham in London there was people that perished, and obviously there was devastation, flooding all the way around the east coast of England.
So I heard, like you talked before about it taught us how to protect.
Canvey's got one of the best protections, and if it hadn't been for 1953, then obviously the loss of life could have been worse, because if it didn't happen in 1953, it could have happened years ago. The seawall structures, the piling and the capstones which they put on top of the piles was all because of 1953. But since the Romans have been here since 2,000 years ago, the Canvey Island has over the centuries been flooding on and off regular basis, sometimes 60, maybe 100 years. But the 53 floods was unusual, and the preparation, the protection of the people and the residents of the community and other areas, right down to Felixstowe, Harwich, obviously up towards London with the Thames barrier that was built, has given a safety cushion with regards to the unexpected surge tides that nature can throw at us, either through global warming or through just natural hazards such as different directions of the wind, and surge tides and spring tides, and the state of the moon does affect the tides and how the oceans works around the coastline of Great Britain. Right, 2,000 years ago, when the Romans were based on Canvey, just after Jesus was crucified, the Romans used Canvey Island for the salt pans to collect salt. Many of the populations, as they know, that were on Canvey for 450 years, but there's been folklores and stories of Roman legions marching around the marshes, which is tongue-in-cheek, but people in folklore on Canvey represent that, and they understand that and believe that the generations that have been on the island, there's these folklores and ghost stories. Moving on to the pirates days, or previous to that, would have been the Vikings, which would have been 841. When the Vikings in the Battle of Benfleet, which was in 845 AD, many Vikings were based on Canvey and in the creeks around. There was a massive battle involving Alfred the Great's brother-in-law, who Alfred the Great, as you might know, is the chap who burnt the cakes. It was his brother-in-law that took on Houston, the chief Viking, that was based in Benfleet. During that battle, they lost thousands of Vikings. The story goes is one of the Vikings was left behind, and he cursed his longboatmen and his Norsemen for leaving him alone and leaving him here to die. He wanders around the mudflats at Canvey Point, cursing the ships that left him behind, and there's some folklores with regards to that he's still around. Moving on to the pirate days in the 1700s, Pirates of the Caribbean era, Canvey was a smuggler's haunt for ships going up towards London to unload their rum, their tobacco, their silks and everything else. A lot of the ghost stories reminisce around the Lobster Smack pub that used to be called the World's End and Sluice House. Charles Dickens was so impressed with the property that he actually used it in his famous book Great Expectations, and if people read Great Expectations, they will see the story about Sluice House, the World's End or the Lobster Smack in Great Expectations. One of the tunnels that leads into the pub, because a lot of the contraband, the brandy, tobacco and the whiskies and everything that they were nicking, that were taken off the ships behind us in the River Thames was stored in the lobster smack and also stored in the church, which is now called St Catherine's. Because the vicar only attended the church now and again, the habit of putting a stuffed cat in the window or putting a flag up was to explain to the customs and excise who were in the area, myself, the Coast Guard, because we started off in the 1800s and we was originally called the Water Guards. In 1822 we became the Coast Guard. Now the customs men and the Coast Guard were out to stop the smuggling and to protect the seashore around the whole of Great Britain. During that period many ghost stories appeared, which some people tongue-in-cheek believed to be calls to stop people going out while the smuggling was going on. One of the famous ones is the horse and cart and the gentleman that drove into the lakeside or the oyster fleet at Canvey High Street. When this folklore went through the sands of time for everyone, what basically happened was in the early 80s they was dredging and clearing out the lake and they came across the body of the horse, the skeleton body of the horse, and also they found the cart. The gentleman that was drove into the lake in the fog was never ever found, and his story is that that gentleman is supposed to wander around the reeds and the marshes at certain times of the year, upset that there was no one there to help him.
Okay, this is our flooded house, and what we're going to do is we're going to show you where all the water, the flood water, comes into your house, because it doesn't come through the front door first, it hides in funny little places inside the house. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn on some buttons and watch the water come out of the river and out of the drain. Here it comes. Still not going through the front door. And then watch the toilet. Is it coming through the toilet? No. And is it coming out of the dishwasher or the washing machine? Here it comes. There it comes. So it's going all inside the house first without coming through the front door. And it's all horrible dirty water, isn't it?
Yeah.
What do you think we can do to stop it? Have you got any ideas?
Yeah.
What's your ideas, Isaac?
I use it.
Okay, all right. Who's got those pieces over there for me that look a bit like sandbags? Right, what we can do is we must stop the water coming through these manhole covers, because if you go walking down the street when it's flood water, you catch your foot in here and you fall over. So we need to weigh it down with something heavy, like some bricks. Okay, have we got another one over there? A little one? Right, and we do the same with the toilet. If we put the lid down and put something really heavy on here to stop it coming out of there, and then we have to ask Mummy or Daddy to put something on here called a non-return valve, that you turn all the water off so it can't come back in your house. Because otherwise you've got all this water in here, look. Well, your television is going to float.